So you're planning on moving to Vancouver? Congratulations. Right now, I'm sure you're super excited, but also feeling pretty anxious. There's so many things that you're realizing that you don't really know and that you're unsure of. Uncertainty sucks, especially when you're making such a huge decision and making such a big move. Well, in my 16-year career, I've helped hundreds of people move to Vancouver. And over that experience, I've seen the good and I've seen the bad. And I've whittled it all down into this video to help make your move a smooth one. Here are 9 tips to make moving to Vancouver easy. Are you ready? Here we go. My name is Sebastian Albrecht with the Living in Vancouver, BC team, and every week I put out videos just like this one about moving to and living in Vancouver. So this week's video is all about tips on how to make moving to Vancouver easy. We're going to start off with some of the things that I think you're probably going to want to take a long, hard think about whether you should bring, whether they're just going to complicate your life. Number one is really just bringing big items. Do you really need the giant couch, big table, really just big furniture items that are generally really, really heavy? And I would really take a long, hard think about whether that is absolutely necessary for your new life in a new city. And these days, sending that sort of thing across the world, across the country, can really, really be expensive, especially when they're heavy. They can be much more affordable just to get rid of, maybe get a little bit of money where you are right now for those items. More importantly, they're pretty easy to buy when you're here. And you might just feel really good about starting fresh. New things when you're in a new city, in a new place, and starting a new life. And so what I find is a lot of people really regret hanging on to some items, and in particular, the really big, bulky, heavy things that they don't really need. And so, get a new couch, get a new bed. Of course, that all has to work within your budget, but those are things that I find a lot of people regret hanging on to when they move to a new place like Vancouver. And number 2 is a car. I think it's going to shock a lot of people moving here from other parts of North America how little you actually need to rely on driving your own vehicle. Now, it really does depend on what part of Vancouver you're living in, because in some of the distant suburbs, it's very, very car reliant. But in the center of the city and very close to the center of the city, you can go without a car, absolutely no problem. There's so many fantastic alternatives to driving, things like public transit, that is cheap and it's effective and it's super convenient. So you got your buses and your SkyTrains and your West Coast Express. You also have Uber and Lyft. And then you have car shares, things like Moto or Evo. You also have excellent bike lanes, the opportunity to be a part of a bike share or a scooter or just walk to work. Vancouver really does lend itself really, really well to all these alternatives. On top of these options, it's just an important reminder that Vancouver is an incredibly small city. So oftentimes it's actually more convenient to use those alternatives rather than depending on your own vehicle. So again, really think hard about whether you're going to need your own car and about whether the expense and sort of the annoyance of getting it to Vancouver is really worth it, because there are a lot of other options. And number 3, pets. It's another thing you're going to want to think really long and hard about whether you want to move to Vancouver with pets. Now, I fully understand that's not really a serious option for a lot of people, but you need to understand how much having pets in Vancouver can make life difficult for you. It's very hard to find rentals that will allow pets. A lot of landlords just do not even consider any potential tenants that have pets. And so in a landscape where it's hard enough finding a home, it's only going to make your life even more difficult if you're moving to Vancouver with pets. And when you're buying, it's the same sort of thing. There's a lot of buildings, a lot of properties, unless you're buying a house, and a lot of people that are moving to Vancouver just aren't in that price range buying a house. But if you're thinking of whether it's a condo or a townhouse, the strata can dictate whether you're allowed to have a pet and what kind of pet and the number of pets you're allowed. And so if you're coming here with 3 dogs as an example, and they're all, I don't know, Dobermans or Pit Bulls, you're gonna find it's very, very difficult to secure a home, whether you're renting or buying. Again, just be aware of that when you're moving to Vancouver. It can make your life difficult securing a home in Vancouver. Tip number 4 is consider neighborhoods. This is probably the most important thing when you're moving to a new city, is really understanding how the city works and what the neighborhoods are like. It's a thing that you can't really change, and it's the hardest thing to understand when you're moving here from somewhere else. What we get a lot of these days, and what's pretty easy, is the options, that the living quarters, the 4 walls in which you're gonna live. You're gonna get a lot of that marketed to you when you're considering moving here. I find a lot of people make the mistake of just falling in love with a particular home or a particular apartment and not really fully considering the actual neighborhood. And in my opinion, it's at least equally important, if not more important, where you're living, not just the 4 walls within which you live. It's that entire neighborhood, because if you don't have the amenities, if you aren't close enough to work, or if there's no good schools in the neighborhood that you've just moved to, your life is going to be miserable. And I've seen a lot of people make that mistake. They move to this city so excited about the home and then realize the neighborhood that they just moved to isn't right for them. And they made that mistake, and I don't want you to make the same mistake. So if you're thinking of moving to Vancouver, be sure to reach out to me. I've helped hundreds of families move to Vancouver over my 16-year career, and I've helped them avoid making this mistake, and I can help you avoid that mistake as well. Be sure to reach out anytime. My contact information is right there on the screen. We can get that conversation started, and I can help you avoid making this mistake as well as all the other ones that we're talking about. And tip number 5 is moving with kids. I have 4 little kids myself. I have yet to move with them. I can't imagine how stressful and hard it will be. But if you're in that position, when you're moving to Vancouver, there's definitely some things that you need to consider. And so it depends on the age of your kids, of course. But if they're not yet in school, your priority at the moment, and this very moment, is securing daycare for them. Daycare space in the city of Vancouver and its surrounding suburbs is at a premium. It's very competitive. It's very hard to find. And in my own personal experience, having 4 children, all of who went to daycare at various stages of their lives, it was incredibly hard to get into. And it was like winning the lottery when you actually secured a daycare for your kids to get into. So the secret is not to be too picky, unfortunately. Because there's so few choices, because it's so highly competitive, you need to apply to every single daycare that you can find, even if you're not so sure if you're going to be living near it. And be doing that as soon as possible, because waiting lists for daycares can be years long, and it can take you years to get into those daycares. That was my own personal experience, and it absolutely sucked. My wife was at the end of her mat leave, ready to go back to work, thinking of my last children who were the twins. Trying to get 2 kids into a single daycare was a nightmare. It all worked out in the end because we were relentless. We didn't take no for an answer, and we just kept asking and going back to the daycares and reapplying and making sure we were the squeaky wheel, which is really the secret in Vancouver to securing daycare space. If your kids are a little bit older and they're of school age, it can also be really hard if they're entering school. So if you're arriving in Vancouver, getting them into kindergarten can be challenging. The kindergarten spots are fewer than for the later years. And the spots end up opening up in many of the schools, you know, if you're entering in grade 3 or grade 7 or grade 10, that's an easier transition. But if you're trying to get into a school for kindergarten, that is also a very difficult spot. Of course, there is a difference between public school and private school. And just know that in BC, the quality of our public school education system is very, very high. A lot of people, no matter how much money they earn, are very happy having their kids go to a public school. But there are some fantastic private school options. And I do have a video on getting your kids into good schools, and I'm gonna post that right there, the link for you. But keep in mind that private schools can run anywhere from about $8,000 a year to about $40,000, $45,000 a year. So there's a huge variation in the potential cost. So if that's important to you, you definitely want to watch that video, and you definitely want to look at what the school options are. But remember that in Vancouver, the public school system is excellent, and I have my children go to public school. They all are getting an excellent education. I myself went to a public school in Vancouver. It is an excellent system that people are very, very happy with. All right, next tip is about boxes. I see so many people waste so much money on buying boxes, buying tape, markers and all that type of stuff, all the paraphernalia of moving. And not only do I find is it an incredible waste of money, but it also has an impact on our environment, and it's totally unnecessary. You don't need to spend $1,000 at a Home Depot or at U-Haul buying boxes, because there are alternatives. So many people are moving all the time, and I think what you'll find is if you go onto Craigslist or your Buy Nothing group on Facebook or Facebook Marketplace, there's gonna be a lot of people giving away boxes. They maybe use them once, maybe a couple times, but they can be reused over and over and over again. So that's one way that you can save a lot of money and also help the environment a little bit. But another way, another option is a company that I've used myself in the past, and I've seen a number of my clients use. In Canada, it's called Frog Boxes, and it's a fantastic reusable option. They're basically these plastic boxes that you can put all your items in. You order as many as you need, they drop them off at your home, and then when you've done with your move and everything has been emptied out, they'll come and pick them up from your new home, and that's all part of the service. Now, this does cost money, but the advantage is the convenience, not having to worry about it, and sort of the environmental impact. You know, these are reusable time and time again, and it's a really convenient service that I find a lot of people really enjoy making use of. All right, so now everything is packed in those boxes, but how do you get it from point A to point B? My advice is hire professional movers. I've personally made the mistake of hiring unprofessional movers, I would say, people that weren't terribly reliable. But there's a reason that, you know, a really good mover costs a certain amount of money. And it's not an area that I've found that it's worth saving a little bit, because if you are trying to cut corners there, what ends up happening is it's going to cost you more money and more headache in the long run. And things get lost, things get broken. In my experience, it's also just the reliability. When I've tried to hire people that weren't super professional, I can remember one of the last times that I moved, we booked this move 3 months in advance. It was the night before the move, and the moving company called us and they were like, "Do you guys really need us? We ended up double booking ourselves and we don't have enough capacity to provide the service." And we're like, "No, absolutely. The whole reason that we booked you 3 months ago was because we really need you, and we're assuming you're gonna show up tomorrow morning to move us." Thankfully they did, and it all worked out in the end, but it caused a lot of concern, a lot of anxiety on our end. And then, you know, when they did show up, it was pretty clear that these were just buddies of the moving company owner. They were not professional movers, and they didn't do a great job. There was a couple things that went missing. There's a couple things that got broken. My lesson learned there was to hire a much more reputable company and not just a guy with a truck and a couple friends. Hire professional movers, especially if you're doing a long distance move. This is an area you don't want to mess around with. Now, the biggest tip, it's all about housing. And when you're moving to Vancouver, you want to know where you're going to sleep at night. And my advice to people moving to Vancouver from somewhere else, have a short-term rental. Don't stay in a hotel. Don't try and book sort of a long-term rental immediately, but book some kind of short-term accommodation, whether it's through Airbnb or VRBO or a long stay hotel of some sort. But generally, at least have 2 weeks of accommodation lined up, ideally a month, maybe even 2 months. And the reason for that is when you're moving to Vancouver, it's going to be nearly impossible to secure a long-term rental. Long-term rentals, the landlords want to be able to meet you. They want to see you face to face. Generally, if you're able to secure something from a distance, that's a long-term rental, it's most likely going to be a scam. And so you want to avoid that. The other great thing about these short-term rentals is it gives you a chance to get familiar with the city and to do it in a way that doesn't provide stress, right? So you can kind of settle in, move into the neighborhood that you think you're going to enjoy and get a feel for that. And generally, if it is a rental, that's the next step, a longer term rental. These rentals can only be secured for the first of the month and occasionally for the middle of the month. So it's unlikely that your dates are going to line up exactly. And as you get closer to the first of the month, the rentals kind of disappear. So at the beginning of the month, usually it's only rentals for the end of the month that are going to be options for you. And for that reason, having a short-term rental option upfront just relieve that stress and anxiety, be able to move into a longer term rental option at your leisure. Now, in terms of buying, you also want that short-term rental up front because you're going to want to be here in person to be able to to view properties and to see them. And it's unlikely you're going to be able to move into that new place that you buy within a week, within a couple weeks. So there's usually, in terms of buying, also a transition period. And usually that takes 1 to 2 months, somewhere in that kind of range. And you just want to know that your housing for you and your family isn't a concern. So by all means, make sure that you have a short-term rental for at least 2 weeks, but anywhere from that 2 weeks to 2 months is what I would recommend for you. And if you are thinking of buying a home when you move to Vancouver, be sure to reach out. My contact information is right there on the screen. I've helped hundreds of people move to Vancouver over my 16-year career, and I can help you too. Just begins with this conversation. Reach out anytime. In the meantime, be sure to check out more of my videos. I do put out videos just like this one every single week. So hit that subscribe button if you want to see more of me. And if you got value out of this video, hit the like button so other people just like you that are thinking of moving to Vancouver are going to find this video as well. In the meantime, here's a couple videos that I think you're really going to like, that I think will help you just as much as this video in your move to Vancouver. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate you sticking with this video all the way to the end, and I'll see you next week.